here at the College of Charleston, in our Office of Institutional Diversity, we care a lot about diversifying higher education. So we have our 10% plan here at the college to diversify the undergraduate population. We're having discussions about how to diversify faculty and staff here at this college. And so, building upon the lessons that we've begun talking about them, what is your vision for how to achieve greater diversity in American higher education based upon some of these lessons from the past? And John, I'll start with you.
Sure, something I think to consider when you're looking at diversifying higher education is, in some ways, I think you start at an institutional level and actually look at what the Supreme Court does give us that we can actually use in implementing policy, and that is not only using race as a plus factor, but looking at that model, or the phrase race as a plus factor, to look at race as an important factor in admissions policies. In other words, develop policy around race to include which means, right, we can't see this as a post-racial society. We have to look at race in admission policies. But not only that, if you're looking at, well, okay, race is important to have on campus. In other words, it's a compelling interest of all institutions to increase diversity. Everybody benefits from a more diverse college campus, for instance. Well, then how do you make that a reality? Well, you have to actively recruit. So that means you have to put money into recruitment and go out and find students of color, because the predominantly white institutions at the College of Charleston don't have the best reputation. You're going to have to go disrupt that reputation and recruit students into the College of Charleston. In addition to that,
like our Charleston Bridge program, which I think
which is
will
great.
Address what you're raising.
The Bridge program, even the Top 10 program, they're great policies,
right,
but they won't work if we don't have the proper funding for those policies. They also won't work once those policies are in place and they're enacted. That's great, but if you don't have faculty supported or staff, if you don't support them who are supporting these initiatives, we're not going to get very far as well. Just getting a student of color through the doors that get to campus is just the start of the larger struggle. When we look at the retention rates of students of color on all predominantly white campuses, after this, especially after the first and second year, those numbers drop. So we're going to have to maintain that. So it's not just necessarily accepting students and recruiting students, it's then supporting them throughout their duration at the college. And those require really a significant amount of institutional support. It's not just saying you believe in diversity, it's putting the appropriate funding and the long-term plans in place to support and to really nurture diversity on campus.
We had the big case, Supreme Court case with the University of Texas, and the whole issue of race and admissions. And so you mentioned race. What would you say to individuals who would say, focusing in on race and making it such a part, of your admissions process could open up your institution to lawsuits? Would you say potentially that maybe looking at socioeconomic status could be a way of getting around race and a safer way of achieving potentially diversity in a higher education institution?
I have no interest in trying to get around race. Okay, so I'm not going to accept the premise that we have to try to find a way to make it more palatable.
Right.
I think we have to understand that the reason we are where we are in history is a result of the mistreatment, the inhumanity, the inequity that has been put on varying groups, particularly blacks, now people of color as we now use the term, certainly even other categories who were left out of the mainstream of publicly supported institutions. And so I guess what I'm saying is our job, while the immediate task may be to change the demographics, our task is really to rewrite the narrative. We've got to say, wait a minute, you're not doing these folks any favor by letting them in. What you're really doing is getting at the time-honored institutional discrimination that has to be repaired. And it is difficult. It means navigating through lots of sensitivities But it really is about a retraining. And as Jon said, it has to happen with faculty, it has to happen in administration, it has to happen not only in the classroom. But I would also extend that to say, we don't want to continue to pick those chosen top or best black students sort of to fill our quota at a predominantly white institution without saying, what have we done as an institution of higher ed to make sure that there is a flow, there is a group that will then be eligible. In other words, we can't act as a university without understanding what's going on in the high schools and the junior high schools.
Absolutely.
And so to the best that we're able, we've got to find a way to support how do we build the pool. But colleges all over this country will fill their quotas with the top. And I just think that maybe that's step one of this transformation, but that's not the answer. We've got to see our responsibility that there are more people in the pool, the student pool, as well as the faculty pool. And there are universities, and I'm sure that there are programs that even at College of Charleston may be involved in, but where you're building your capacity for faculty of color through summer programs and fellowships and collaboration. You know, I think it's just important, if we're going to be honest about what we're trying to achieve, we cannot be so focused on let's find us enough to satisfy the federal government that we did. You know, we've got to say, you know, this is a very, very deep-seated historical problem, and us just satisfying our numbers doesn't put us on the front edge of change. It really doesn't.
Well, on the faculty side, we're all three of us have or have had some connection to faculty ranks here at the College of Charleston, and so I've had discussions with individuals about diversifying at the faculty level. You hear concepts like setting aside lines that would be opportunity hires, but at the same time, you have, I guess, maybe sometimes a fear of people in administration who have the power to do that, apprehensive about pressure from people who are not from a disadvantaged group, wondering whether that's a set-aside or special privilege opportunity for someone who falls in an underrepresented group. How do you feel about something like an opportunity hire set aside with a line to bring in more faculty of color at an institution like the College of Charleston?
I think an opportunity hire, I think it's necessary to increase diversity, especially among faculty, right? And that's also recognizing that not just diversity, but race plays a very important role in the functioning of any given university. So I think that's strong institutional support for increasing diversity on campus. And the opportunity hire is one way to approach that. It also forces a conversation among faculty who would say, okay, well, this person, you know, received this job because of the color of their skin, and I didn't receive that benefit or privilege. So it forces a conversation about this among faculty, and faculty need to have this. They're not just teaching in the classroom; they themselves have to see how they are part of the system and how they can either be part of the solution or the problem. And an opportunity hire, I think, helps present this opportunity for discussion about what it means to have a diversified faculty.
Yeah. I want to focus for our last question on the student population and what we can do to get young people in our classrooms to move beyond complacency and to not take for granted the rights that they now have. I know in some of my experiences in classes, when you talk about the issue of race, they see it very differently from maybe people who are older and have gone through that particular era, lived through it. And it doesn't really mean necessarily the same thing because they haven't experienced it. I've had conversations even outside of race with young women who don't really understand the whole concept of suffrage and what the 19th Amendment actually means and how they react to some of the things that occurred in this political season in our presidential election cycle. So a question I would have for both of you is, how can we reach young people in our college and university classrooms to move beyond complacency and taking the rights they have today for granted and to become more active in addressing critical issues reminiscent of what we saw in the civil rights era? And Jon, you've done research looking at how young people in high school got involved in the civil rights era, crest sit-ins and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think, one way to engage youth is to show them examples of how young people were actually involved in the civil rights movement. So again, we go back to the sort of king narrative, the great man narrative, that it took this great leader to mobilize a movement or inspire a movement. When in reality, it's local people, oftentimes young people, who are taking the first steps on the front line. So in addition to the work that the NAACP was doing in Charleston, for instance, when you look at the result of the Crest sit-in in 1960, right, we begin to see these were over 20 high school students who marched from Burke High School, marched nearly 2 miles downtown. And after that inspires other young people to become involved, but it also inspires adults to become more active in the movement as well. So that had it had a significant impact on how the movement operated. So I think, sharing those examples of young people involved in the movement can help inspire young people to show that you don't have to be dependent upon someone else, that you can do it yourself. And oftentimes history shows us that that's what it actually took. A young person standing up and saying enough is enough, and that person then goes to inspire change.
Yeah, and let me add to that I know how frustrating it is sometimes when we can't seem to pull out of young people the kind of energy that we would imagine that they could give. I think it means then that program planners, faculty members, administrators are really going to have to shift their view. I believe that young people are not as much complacent as they are disengaged, and I think that that's a learned behavior. And I think that we have to come up with the most creative ways to make them understand how the power brokering that is going on in the nation, in the city, in the college, affects them. And I don't think we do, I think we're too intellectual about these topics. As opposed to, but what's that got to do with the price of the dormitory that you're trying to live in? How does that relate to what people get paid on an annual basis, and who has access to what resources? I just think that we haven't changed the conversation to focus on what they are facing and confronting. And I think it's very easy to criticize young people as not being interested, but I think we also confuse them because we talk about how, the world is yours and you can be anything you want to be, but we don't want to really discuss the very real barriers that separate people. And they are some of the people that get separated even if they don't realize it, And so I'm thinking that the narrative, again, has to be challenged. I'm a former college history professor, and I know the blank stares that I get when I want to talk about the past. But then when I try to find ways to link the issue to that which they are actually going through, it's just amazing how involved they can be. I agree with Jon that they have to be fed the role models. They have to see that it's been done before. They're not inventing a wheel here.
So they have to know that history. They
have to know the history for sure. But I think that the history has to be delivered in such a way that it's not romanticized and that it really does relate to the fact that, who's on scholarship, who's not on scholarship, what are the decisions being made about access, what are the decisions being made that they could have some say-so in. And it means starting with decision-making, whether it's through student council or whether it's an activity in the classroom. But I just don't think that young folks are, by and large, uninterested. I think we have not done, older ones of us have not done a very good job of clarifying what has changed and what is very much needing them in order to continue to change.
Absolutely.
And just maybe add a little bit too, in terms of connecting it to today. So using, I mean, history is a useful tool, but if
Right.
it's not contextualized what happened
Right.
now,
Exactly.
you won't get that engagement I think that a lot of people
Right.
are looking for. And to see how the issues brought up in the movement, such as the struggle for quality education, or the right to enter professional, as the professional parts of society, right, on an equal basis. If you look at the numbers today and to show that that's not happening in many ways, that the movement isn't over, and that's a narrative that is fed to a lot of students. Okay, this
Right.
ended in 1968 or 1969.
Yep.
Yet people are still struggling. And of course, as I teach, the Black Lives Matter movement is really powerful to teach, because you can go through history and give the examples of police brutality that inspired urban rebellion.
Yeah.
Throughout history, it was oftentimes traced to police brutality. So this didn't start,
Right.
recently. This was a long issue that
Yeah.
this country has been dealing with. So you can see,
Well,
confront people
absolutely.
with what's happening
Yeah.
today as well.
Yeah. I'm just.
And
a
I
fir-
think, let me just
Yeah.
add to that, I do believe also that if, in terms of how to get across these messages, one thing that the movement did help many people, Black folks especially, and many others, to understand what is injustice. See, if we would do a better job of clarifying injustice and not pick out, again, these particular issues or groups, we have to appeal to now and future generations and say, if it can happen to them, it can happen to you.
Right.
And so let us examine those forces that dictate how our lives are run, and realize that while it may have been that group that was at the receiving end of the injustice, times will change, and it can very well be you. And so I just think that appealing to people's understanding that, do we want a society that has fairness for all?
Right.
Well, that's a very serious commitment to make with your life,
Right.
regardless of where or in which particular arena you decide to put your energies in.
Well, this has been a very insightful conversation. I thank both of you for honoring us and being our first guest today.
Good luck with the
Great.
series.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you and good luck.
Thank you.